Hello, everyone, and welcome to the paddock. My name is Henrik.
And my name is Sierra, and we will be going over Brazil 2024. That was a good race.
Indeed,
Very chaotic, but a good race.
I second that. And let's just start off with the obvious one. Qualifying was postponed.
Well, we had sprint qualifying. We can do sprint stuff first, because
Yep,
that's
that's the gist of it.
the sprint was, I think, the straightforward. Like you had well, I guess it wasn't straightforward because you had Oscar going on pole instead of Lando, but I think everybody knew that McLaren would probably switch them.
Yes, and they did the switcheroo 2 or 3 laps before the ending.
I mean, they left it really late.
Hmm.
They had so many opportunities before that.
Yep.
Like, I think by lap 3 or 4, he had enough time between him. There was enough time between Lando and Charles that they could have swapped. And they said they basically didn't. Charles and Max caught back up, and then it just became a nightmare.
It was a safety car fest.
It seemed like the FIA was waiting for them to call the safety car. And then you have Max, who rightfully got a penalty because, again, it was the delta to the safety car that he broke. So
Yeah,
him
and
getting
to explain the safety car delta is that where you have a time that you have to stay behind.
you have a set time that set sectors that you can't go past, and
Mm,
it wasn't because I know a lot of people are like, if he's getting a penalty because he was next to Oscar, yada yada. I'm like, no, if you look at the actual sector times from when it happened, he
yep.
violated that. And Max knew that's why Max didn't, wasn't super upset about that because it was there. Like he couldn't you couldn't change that.
It's in the rules. It's very clear. You have to stay 10 car lengths behind the safety car at all times.
Well, it was a VSC. It wasn't an actual safety car.
Yeah, and same goes for the VSC. You have to stay behind the delta time that's given to you, and that's
Yeah.
yep.
And he didn't, which is why he ended up fourth instead of third, and why Charles was then given third.
So an inherited podium for him, I guess.
Although he did drive a good sprint, he did have those mistakes. Max even made note of the mistakes and said it was too bad for Charles, but me and my little Charles Max love is there. Um, I think a lot of people agree with that friendship as it is what it is.
It's a strange friendship, I can say that.
I could say it in a more different way of saying it, but I will not say it. I will state that Pierre had a really good sprint coming in seventh. You had Sergio finally getting in the points again with an eighth, which he started. Let me double check where he started. In 13th.
So he got up to P6,
Eight.
was it?
P8.
Ah,
He was
P8.
he was the last of the points in the sprint.
So he got one lousy point.
I mean, the fact he went from as far as back on the grid as he did to get a point, I guess you can commend him for that since he's not been doing well.
Yeah, absolutely, but still,
Not enough,
one
in my
point
opinion.
isn't a lot.
I will state that besides this weekend being really good, there were a lot of weird calls made by the FIA in terms of safety,
Yes.
which I guess we'll go over to the main bread and butter of, I assume, this entire podcast, which is the actual race and qualifying. First off, I do want to commend the FIA for one, understanding that they probably weren't going to get qualifying in on the Saturday. So then moving
Oh,
it to early on the Sunday, but then
yes.
also moving up the race instead of
Hmm.
leaving it where it was. Annoying for me,
Great for me.
but it did look, by the time like the race was supposed to start originally, the rain was lighter, but I think the track would have been too wet for them to do anything for them to start on time. So I do think it was better that they did start earlier, even though they did get more rain throughout that entire race.
I got flashbacks to Imola last year when I saw the pictures, but
It wasn't that bad. It was not flooding.
but
It
almost.
gave me I think it was Austria, yeah, this year when you saw like the Sauber pit guys in the pit lane doing the boat, it gave me that.
Yeah.
But to see all those fans stay, for one, to see if they would get the qualifying on the Saturday, but then to see also them all come in that Sunday, be there super early, which I believe it was 7:30 their time
So 11 my time, of course.
and 5:30 in the morning my time. It was really nice to see. It's why Brazil is one of those tracks I do want to actually go see in person.
Brazil is a good one. Well,
Always has been, always will be.
yep.
All right. So qualifying in general, you already knew it was going to be interesting to say the least, due to the fact that it was going to be wet and you had only intermediate tires. You were trying to find the good window where it wasn't going to like chuck it down rain-wise. Some notable mentions, Franco, Ollie, Lewis all being knocked out in the first round of quali, which also Nico Hulkenberg, I think the Haas just did not look good in the wet, especially if you looked at their pace on Friday, where they did have like Ollie in practice, and he also qualified really high for the sprint. The Haas looked like it had pace, and they have always been good around Brazil. So it was a little upsetting to see them go out in Q1 due
Hmm.
to the rain. But I think the more noticeable one and the one that I'm more harping on is Lewis
Yeah, that was the big talking point of the weekend was his surprise Q1 exit. But
in the rain
yeah.
where he is supposed to be really good.
Yeah, hence the surprise is supposed to be a good one in the rain, but no, that didn't happen.
I mean, Lando also almost got knocked out in Q1, so it was just like what was happening kind of deal. Like you had this moving to Q2, both RBs getting knocked out due to the red flag that Lance's red flag, and it was the first time you saw Max get really heated in one of these points.
Which is very common.
Not in qualifying, not it. I get where he's coming from because like, mind you, even if they threw the red flag immediately, Max would not have made it through. He was already out.
Hmm.
I think he was sitting at P11 at that point. I understand Max's point because the conditions were very wet and all these other things. You could see that Stroll was not going to be able to get that car moving again, his car was damaged. So why did it take them 30 odd seconds to throw the red flag? Like
Well,
more in the rain than like if it was a dry track, all this, I could understand them holding off because you do have that progression of people getting there. But this is it. The conditions were bad, and you could see them having issues. And if somebody
yep.
else goes off, you could have somebody literally drive in, like hit him. So in my mind, in this type of conditions, the red flag should have been thrown basically right away.
It should have been thrown when the crash happened, but we aren't in the FIA, sadly, or
No.
race direction, so we don't know.
No. And then of course you have Valtteri, who could have maybe made it into Q3 because he is very good in driving in the wet.
Yeah, he could have made it into Q3. He could have taken pole. He could have won as well if he had qualified higher, but no, he didn't win.
Because we're recording this on the Sunday after the race just due to timing schedule. So we will talk about the things that dropped later this week that happened.
Earlier this week, I mean.
Earlier, later, whatever. But he absolutely could have been in the points this weekend.
He
Moving
could
to
have
Q,
won. He could have been on the podium. Yeah, a lot of things.
imagine a Salva on the podium the way that it is
Oh,
this year.
oh man, yeah, that would be fun.
Of course, you had also Carlos Sainz going out in Q2 with a crash.
Also a very big shocker, but yeah,
For some reason, I don't remember Carlos ever being particularly good in the rain. Like he usually can keep it on the road and finish, but
Mm.
out of both of them, I think I remember seeing more Carlos being in the wall in the wet. Like look at China this year.
China was a strange one by all means, so I won't really fault him for that.
I mean he caused a red flag and then made it back to the pits. Like commend
Yeah,
him.
yeah, absolutely. He has to be commended for that. And of course, we had the Williams blunder in China, which they aren't good in China. Let's face it.
All right. So then moving to Q1, both Aston Martins would finish on the end of the grid because both did crash. Of course, Lance made it through to Q3, but did not start Q3 due to the crash in Q2. I really didn't know who was going to be on pole for this race for the longest time, just because Yuki was going really well. Yuki ended up finishing in P3 for the sprint. Russell looked really well in that Mercedes. You even had Esteban looking really good in the Alpine, it's an Alpine, so we were all like, what? But Lando
Yep,
taking it, I think, shows just how good he was he's very good qualifying in the wet. And I think this definitely proved that.
let's face it,
Um,
he's a good qualifier.
yes, the Ferrari just did not look good in the wet, which is why Charles only got to sixth. Unfortunate for Alex, who I think he was second or I think he was second at that time before he shunted, and then also caused him not to be able to actually take part in the race,
He was
which
in sixth. Yeah,
which is really sad because I think he could have gotten pretty high or even gotten on the podium. I think Williams would have done the same kind of strategy that Max and the Alpines did, where they stayed out for just as long as possible. I think Alex is really good in rain.
mm.
Unfortunately, with having qualifying early in the morning and then having a race later in the day and the mechanics already working on Franco's car, it was
They
it's
had
unfortunate.
to, yeah, they had to prioritize, and they prioritized Colapinto in
Well, I
that
wouldn't say they
instance.
prioritized Colapinto. It's just Colapinto crashed in Q1, so they got the car back first and they could work on that first. And then you looked at the damage on Alex's car, and it was just, you knew that if he even made it to the race, it would have been a pit lane start. He would not have gotten on the grid to start.
No, no, of course not. He would have started in the pit lane at best
Yeah.
and not taken part at worst, which happened.
Because Carlos even he had to go to the pit lane. But to be fair, there wasn't really that much chaos that happened the first lap. It happened in the
No,
formation lap.
again.
Let's get to the meat and potatoes of this podcast, which is the actual race. I do have a question for you.
All right.
So we saw a black flag. We
Mm.
saw a team getting known for tire pressure changes, which is against the rules in the regulations. And we saw somebody fail to abort the start correctly. How is only one of them disqualified and the other two are only fined?
I do not know.
I can
Bias
like
maybe?
the black flag, like what Hulkenberg did, the team and he should have known that the marshals touched his car to get it back on the track. He should have just gone to the pits and stayed there. Neither
Did
the
he?
team
No, 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 he
did
didn't.
he the team or that happened? No. So when the red flag happened, he got the black flag. Completely understandable. Really upset that he couldn't finish, but understandable. To the aborted start. First off, we had a red flag. How could you not take care of it in the red flag?
Yeah, well, that was a strange sight.
Because you even had Max, who was further back because of the grid penalty he took. So he was at P17.
Yes.
He even was like, what are we doing? Like, what's happening? It should have been a penalty. It shouldn't have been a fine. It should have been a penalty. He should have, I will say George and Yuki and Esteban as well, because they all did it, but Lando is the one in the front. He's the one leading. So if he's gonna go, I think the four cars behind him would follow no matter what. But McLaren should know how an aborted start works. Yes, we don't have them often, but you should know. And they should have told him, no, don't go yet. You have to wait for whatever. And they didn't. So the fact that he only got a fine where he absolutely broke the rules because there were people on the track And you had already seen somebody go off in the formation lap. We'll talk about Lance Stroll because that's a whole other thing.
Yep. So he got what? A
He got,
€5,000 fine?
yes, which is less than what Charles got fined for his damn for his damn swearing in the FIA.
So he got twice that for the
And
language usage in the press
yes,
conference. So yeah, I don't know if it should have been the other way around.
no, in my opinion, Lando should have got a stop and go penalty.
Yeah, or at best a drive-through. I guess I
That
don't
and it
know.
should have been added to the end of his time. Like there's nothing else that you can tell. Like it is specifically stated how an abort start works. Neither the team nor him followed. It's not that difficult. It really isn't.
No,
And
one would think it's quite easy, but no, it's not easy.
And then we have the Merck situation, which I understand it's the team fine. But again, they also only got fined 5,000 for each. It's the same amount as Charles in total, but it's 5,000 for each. When the team, again, it's not the driver's fault, but the team under pressurized the tires. How do you not get disqualified as a team when it's both your cars having under pressurized tires?
Again, I do not know. Should they? Yes. Did they? No.
There should have been there should have been two more cars that did not finish this race. Well, two cars could have finished this race, but should have been two more cars that have been qualified as not finishing / disqualified from this race, in my opinion. And
Yes.
it's not me bashing on Lewis, even though Lewis had a horrible time, he still got into the points. It's not me bashing on Russell, who could have won this race had the team actually kept him out when he was saying to stay out. But on a
We all
team
know what happened the last time he won, in
but
quotations.
But as a team, you have a set tire pressure, and both cars were under it.
Mercedes and tires. They go
Uh,
together like a bad year.
so that's the penalty part of this, and me not understanding what the FIA was doing.
And of course, we'll get to the recent bashing between the FIA and the Grand Prix Drivers Association. But
That's fun. Let's go to a happier topic. Let's go to Max.
let's go.
This drive to me cemented that he is one of the greatest, not only wet weather drivers in all of F1, but one of the it's the reason why he will be a 4-time champion by the end of the season.
Let's make that 8, shall we?
I don't think he's going to stay in the sport long enough to do 8. I think people saying like this isn't that good, this isn't like it's biased, he got lucky, all this. I'm like, no. If you watch Max race, first off, he got from P17 to I believe P12 within the
The
first
first
lap.
lap. Yeah.
Now, mind you, once he was the only one making passes on track. Mind you, once he got to Charles, Charles knows how to race Max, so he got stuck behind Charles, and then
For an odd lap or two, so
it was a decent amount of laps because there was a train basically from Yuki to Charles, and then Max joined them.
and
And
that
then
was a DRS train, so
there was no DRS, it was just a slipstream and rain train.
slipstream, okay.
But then you had Charles pitting to try and get out of it, which was the bad. It looked like it could have been like a good choice, but then it was with the the safety car, and then also the virtual safety car, and then the red flag that came out definitely showed it wasn't the correct choice, but it did show me this weekend showed me that I really want a Charles Max championship battle fight. Like I want that so bad. Like they fight each other so well on track.
Will you get it? Most likely not.
Next year I think next year it's possible. It just depends on how good the Red Bull will be next year.
People keep saying next year, next year, next year, but does it happen? No.
Well, I can't predict the future.
Well, usually not.
And then once Max got in the lead after the safety car behind when Carlos crashed again, you had him taking the lead over Esteban, and it was just 17 fastest laps in a row. Like I cannot emphasize enough that he did that amount of fast laps in the row in the wet. Like it just I I was a little speechless by the end of it. I clapped. I almost cried because he hadn't won since Spain of this year. That was the last time he was on the top step.
Which was in June, mind you.
So you could see how much this meant to him. And then we'll follow it up with the Alpines getting a double podium.
Get on them.
Again, rain definitely plays in the part with this because I don't think, I mean, the Alpine definitely looks better since they got the upgrades in Austin. But if you told me going into this race that they'd be on the podium and didn't tell me there was rain, I would say you're smoking something.
Same goes for me. If you told me that, say, last year, this time, then if you told me, hey, Alpine is going to be on the podium next year in Brazil, I would say, no, that's bogus. But yeah,
Yes.
they are.
So it makes for an interesting constructors battle. We'll get into like the standings and how everything looks after we kind of finish this off. But definitely, it was very nice to see Alpine, how much they liked it. It was nice to see Esteban get that last like hurrah with Alpine before going to Haas.
He probably won't get any of those with Haas, knowing Haas,
It,
but yeah.
I mean, we don't know. To me, Haas looks like the fifth fastest team on the grid most weekends. Now, if you were to tell me, like, between, like, the fact that Hulkenberg and even Magnussen in the last couple of races have gone well. Of course, Hulkenberg was sick this weekend, which is why Ollie Behrman stood in.
Magnussen, not Hulkenberg.
But yeah, it was just nice to see Alpine. They do hurl themselves up into sixth position with this double podium, which says a lot and how bad they were because they were ninth before this. The fact we can go down farther, the fact that you had both V carbs finishing in the points, of course. I mean, I didn't think Yuki was gonna score a podium just because between VSCs coming out and then possible safety cars and possible red flag just because you could see what the weather was doing. I figured he'd be in the points, maybe a top 5 for him, depending on how it all played out. But the fact that both him and Lawson got into the points and both qualified into the points and then stayed in the points just tells you how good that V carb was in these conditions.
And it tells you a lot about the pairing as well. Sure, they don't really like each other that much, but still a good pairing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's still up in the air of who's going to be in that Red Bull seat, especially with the rumors coming out and it was seen that Christian made it very much was seen going in and out of Williams. So it is made pretty clear that he is in talks with Colapinto to if he'll be in the main Red Bull seat or if Colapinto will be in the V Carb seat. We shall see. I think it's down between Liam and Colapinto for who takes over Perez's seat.
I've seen signs as well in the main team, but who knows?
We'll get to the speculations as well after this because I think after digesting this race, I think the more things that happened off race after this race happened, definitely take a little bit more precedent. Sergio Perez not being able to get in the points this race tells you everything you need to know. He got a point in the sprint, could not get a point in the main race, finished behind Lewis, which is why I'm okay with Lewis, the Mercs, not fully getting DQ'd. I will say the other reason that I'm annoyed with the Max VSC from the sprint is the fact that Max also got 2 penalty points. But then you had Lando not even get a penalty point when he got fined.
It should have been
Both.
3 penalty points, maybe? I don't know.
He should have got penalty points, is what I'm saying. I forgot about that point. But I bring that up because Oscar ended up punting Liam off the road at some point when Liam was running really high, which Oscar ended up getting a 10-second penalty. And then they ended up switching Lando and Oscar at one point when the last restart happened, when Max took the lead and you saw Lando go off the road and all this and you basically saw the championship end in a matter of seconds.
Yep.
And then
so Mexico's championship back on and Brazil is championship back off, I guess.
Not back off, championship over.
Not back off, championship over. Okay. I'll take that.
But you had McLaren asking Lando so they swapped positions and then they asked Lando towards the end because I think they forgot Oscar had a 10-second penalty. They asked Lando to get closer to Charles. And you literally had Lando go back on the radio and said, "You want me to get closer to Charles in these conditions? You're mad," basically, is how I saw it. Which is why why Yuki finished ahead of Oscar, but he basically split the RBs. But Oscar ended up getting the 10-second penalty with 2 penalty points. I believe that's the first 2 penalty points on his record. And then you also had Ollie Behrman, who also got a 10-second penalty and also got two penalty points. So he has 2 penalty points on his record. And then finishing off, you have Valtteri in 13th. He was running really well. Again, he kind of got the VSC. He went into pit and then the red car happened and he was out of position and all this. So unfortunately, he looked really well. I think he was running around like the 8, 9, 10, 11 area.
That sounds about right.
You had Fernando, who did end up spinning at one point, which is why he finished so low. But for him to go on the radio and say he is finishing the race, even though you could tell Lewis and Fernando, this was a difficult race in terms of conditions of the track. So for him to say like, I'm finishing this for the mechanics, I commended him for that because like they had to fix 2 cars. It was a weird weekend, like just to see him being able to finish that race.
With porpoising, mind you.
Yes. And then you have Zhou. To how this man finished last, I don't understand. Fernando caught him and passed him. He was like
Didn't he lap him as well?
No one got lapped this race, but that's just because of the weather.
Oh yeah, he could unlap himself, I forgot that.
Well, he did unlap himself because when the red car happened, they sent him out first because he was in the wrong position. So he did unlap himself. So he didn't get lapped this race. Was close to it.
Which is a win for him. He didn't get lapped. Hey.
No. It's not a win because the fact that both Ollie and Fernando spun out. Well, again, when Ollie went off, he got a penalty or he went to the walls like Hulkenberg did when he was in contention to win the race a couple of years ago, but had enough time to like he didn't do as much damage and all that. Both of them finished above Zhou.
Which in itself isn't an achievement anymore.
It made no sense. But we'll move on. So this is why we need to bring it up. So we had 5 people not finish this race. You had, of course, Nico got disqualified for Marshall intervening. You had Carlos who crashed. You had Franco who crashed, which they should have just called the red flag beforehand. I understand they were trying to keep the cars on the track for that safety underneath the safety car, but the weather by that point was so bad. You could see people literally going. It looked like they were in boats with how much water there was on the track. So you knew someone was going to crash. The fact they waited until someone did crash to call the red flag, and it unfortunately being Colapinto, it's annoying.
Indeed. The fans had turned up as well in Brazil, so annoying for them, I guess.
It was very disappointing to see, which is why the Drivers Association made it out. We'll talk about that. But if you look at the standings, you have Alex finishing ahead of Lance. And you're like, why does that matter? Because, like, shouldn't Alex be below Lance because Lance at least made it back to the grid? Well, you're correct. Lance did make it back to the grid, people listening and watching, but the man spun on the formation lap.
Which means no points.
No points, and he technically didn't start. Well, he could have started. There was enough runoff for him to start. He decided to try and leave through a gravel trap. Mind you, this is a different gravel trap to other gravel traps. But in a walkthrough of the track before the week, he could have seen how deep these gravel traps were. And he had enough runoff. I don't care that his dad owns a team. If I was on that team, whether it be Fernando, anybody else, I would walk out. If I was Newey, I would be like, I'm not coming to this team if he is still in that seat after this.
Well, if you were in that team to begin with, and just if you notice that as a mechanic or something, how would you then say I'm leaving, or fire me, or
I would basically hold a walkout, like strike it, being like, we're not coming back to work until he's out of that seat. Because remind you, they got up at 7:30. They had
4:30 a.m.
They had quali at 7:30 their time.
Yep.
He crashed the car. They fixed his car, and then in the formation lap, he spuns off. Sure, not a big deal. He didn't damage the car or anything. But then goes into the gravel trap and doesn't even start the race. To me, if I was a mechanic, a race engineer, or anything, that is a slap to the face for me.
Yep, that's a slap below the belt, all right.
And I saw a quote from him, and it's like, if you Mind you, this might be a meme quote, but it's still a quote. Never mind. It's a meme quote. But still, it's a funny meme quote. If you no longer go for a gravel pit for that exists, you're no longer a racing driver. For people who say like, who's a wet weather specialist? Lance Stroll is not on my list. I understand he had that great pole lap in Turkey a couple of years ago, which everybody thought that's where this whole thing came from. Mind you, he didn't even finish on the podium that race. But this is unexcusable.
Well, if that were me, I'm just saying, hey, I'm leaving the sport entirely,
I would be mortified. Mortified.
and understandably so.
I think that covers the race.
And let's go on then.
So, to start, we're going to go over standings and things like that, and then we will get into we'll get into the news later that happened later / earlier last week. So, and this is why I say championship off. Lando had to outperform Max this weekend. The only weekend in this triple header that he outperformed Max was Mexico. So Max now sits at 393 points. Lando sits at 331 points. And Charles sits at 307 points. Mind you, there is a graphic going around that says Charles is eliminated. Technically, there is 86 points left. He is 86 points behind Max. If Max and Lando were to DQ the rest of the season,
Or
and
DNF
Charles
for don't score points, yeah.
and Charles wins and gets fastest lap in all the races and the sprints, he could technically win. It's most likely not going to happen, so by technicality, Charles is eliminated. It is now a 62-point difference between Max and Lando.
Yep, so one has to not score.
One also has to not score, but Lando has to win the rest of the season, get fastest lap, and I believe Max has to finish below, I'm going to say P6, just to be safe here. P6 or lower the rest of the season.
I.e., not score.
He would score.
Well, if he were to finish
it's not high.
P10 or something, yeah, then he would score 1 point, which
I'm saying he has to score below he can only score a P6 or lower.
i.e., in most cases, not score.
So that is why I say the championship is over.
A P6 for that man is a bygone dream or a bygone nightmare. So,
and I mean, the Red Bull did seem to get a better understanding of their car come this triple header. Of course, Mexico did not go well for Max, but that's due to a driving standard than a car-ish standard. But as much as I say, like, I think Charles could have won, I think Lando could have won, all this, realistically, if you were to ask me, like, what I see this championship was before Texas happened, I would have said more Lando has a chance to fight for the championship. But in reality, I felt like Max was gonna win. He had enough of a lead in terms of points and buffer, and the fact that McLaren was not optimizing the championship as well as they did, that Max would win. And I think it was more between Lando and Charles to see who would finish second. Which Charles and Lando, there's only 24 points between them.
So yeah, about a race win in points.
It is a race win in points. If Charles were to win and Lando finished P10, they would be tied on points. But Charles would go in the second at that point because Charles would have more wins than Lando. Just for clarification, if it were to happen.
Will it happen? No.
Well, you don't know. We still have 3 races, and I think Max and Lando could still crash.
Will it happen? Most likely not.
Well, we have Qatar, Vegas, which seems like a decent track. You have Qatar, which seems like a decent track, and you have Abu Dhabi, which seems like which is a decent track. So that is the standings. I guess the other main note here, there is only 2 points between Russell and Lewis. Russell's at 192, Lewis is at 190. Will Lewis be able to outscore George before the end of the season? Probably not. With the other big points haul, you have Yuki jumping into 11 with 28 points. You have Pierre with finishing 3rd, jumping right behind Yuki in 12th with 26 points. You have Lance falling down into 13th with 24 points. And you also have Esteban, who I forget where he was sitting. He jumps to 14th with 23 points. So, will the Alpines finish ahead? Both Alpines finish ahead of Lance Stroll.
Yes.
My early decision, yes. Somehow Valtteri is still at the bottom of the damn championship.
No points.
No points. Still behind Logan. You have Liam a point behind Franco. I think
Ah,
that might also decide if who maybe gets that Red Bull seat, but again, we'll get into it. And then the Constructors Championship. Now this is where your main battle is gonna happen. So to me, it is fully between McLaren and Ferrari just because Checo is not gonna do anything for Red Bull. Red Bull will finish P3.
P3
They're
or lower.
Yes.
That's a safe bet.
Uh, no. It will be P3. They have 544 points. The next closest team is Mercedes with 382 points. There's not enough points for Red Bull to catch up, or Mercedes to catch up to Red Bull. There are 36 points between these two teams in McLaren and Ferrari. And then if you look at, so you have a battle for that championship, which I think Ferrari might still be able to get the win here. I'm still gonna back Ferrari, even though McLaren is in the lead, and they had both of their drivers finish in the race in Brazil, but you still
Mm.
had it wasn't as many points as they could have secured, but they did outscore Ferrari last weekend. It's more the P6 race that you're looking at. So Alpine jumped into sixth. They're at 49 points. Again, they were in ninth. You had,
So up 3 places.
yep, you had Haas, who's sitting 3 points behind them in 46 points. And then you have RB with 44 points in eighth. And now you have Williams sitting direct in ninth with 17. Like that tells you the swing of points that just happened. So this P6 to P8 battle this is going to come down to the last race of the season, and I will be very entertained to watch. This makes me feel horrible. Like the Williams this past weekend, and knowing Carlos is going to Williams and he will be literally starting, his constructors will be starting in P9 next season is,
It's painful, really.
yes. If you are a Carlos Sainz fan, to why he is on a Williams, I will never know. For all those people who said, did Ferrari fire the wrong driver? I think this race showed that they fired the right driver. If you,
But look at Mexico and what happened there.
yes, but
They
then you can
fired the
also say,
wrong driver.
look at Monaco, look at Monza, look at Austin.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's get into the news that happened this past week. So you
Yep.
had first the Drivers Association taking place,
Yes.
and then making a very
It's a war of words between the Grand Prix Drivers Association and the FIA, basically.
yep, and the FI the Drivers Association basically calling out the president, saying like these drivers are adults. They don't need media training when it comes to swear words. Also, the way they use swear words is different, yada yada yada. You also had them coming to the defense of a lot of the drivers. You heard a lot of the drivers' messages afterwards of like you heard Ali Behrman saying like I'm trying not to die on these conditions. You heard Franco constantly asking for wet tires because of the conditions. You heard even Oscar being like, these conditions are not right.
Mm.
You had George even saying like we should stay out because it's going to be a red flag. It's going to be a red flag. This has to be a red flag. Of course, Mercedes didn't stay out, and then the red flag happened. He's like, I knew this was going to happen. Like the conditions were bad, so it's not surprising that we do see that those drivers come out and have a statement like that.
No, it's very natural and hopefully normal, but no. Mr. President of the FIA deems it's not normal, not acceptable, but yeah.
So that is that. We'll go to more happier news. Well, I'm not fully happy. I'm happy but not happy. So Sauber finally announced their lineup for next year. They announced that both Bottas and Zhou would no longer be with the team, which more people were sad about Bottas leaving than Zhou, understandably. And then they was
Mm.
also announced that Bortoleto, a Brazilian driver who is currently leading the F2 championship, will be taking that second seat. So it will be Nico Hulkenberg and Bortoleto in.
I don't know how I feel about that.
I'm surprised they waited till after Brazil, just
Which,
because he is a Brazilian driver, but I think that has to do more with McLaren since Bortoleto is a McLaren Academy driver.
so yeah, it has a taste of not letting him go, I guess.
Yeah, if anything, I think Salvo would have wanted to announce it in Brazil because again, they it was his home race, so having it, and I think even Bortoleto would have wanted it to happen announced in his home race. But I think McLaren wanted, again, I don't know because I'm not in either of the teams, but I think McLaren was like, we're gonna keep it off the down low because I think they were expecting to have a more basically chew into Max's lead and have a more standing. And then that
Mm.
didn't happen, so they're like, you can announce it now type of deal.
But again, I still don't know how I feel about it. I'm very confused as to how it will pan out.
I mean, this is the if you're gonna ask me out of all the rookies to go on the grid, I think with the fact that he's still in F2, I think the fact that he is able to go into a team that will not be good as we are expecting next season, it allows him to just kind of get his wings underneath F1 and can develop, and then when they turn to Audi, maybe have if Audi actually looks good in 2026, it gives him a better opportunity. I also think that if he can at least stay close to Hulkenberg, maybe even outperform him, maybe come the end of the year next year, or even just
Mm.
like every once in a while, like just in quali, I think it does show a lot of promise for those other teams, especially McLaren. If, say, Lando and Oscar do fall out, they do have somebody they can put in that seat afterwards.
Of course, both the McLaren drivers have long contracts.
But we've seen if they are gonna butt heads, like I think a lot of people are expecting next year, especially if they have a good car under them, it's a different story. You also had some other news. So you had McLaren's team principal Andrea Stella come out and basically say that the drivers' championship was never the goal. And I'm like, sure, buddy, sure it wasn't your priority.
Okay, what did he mean by that?
I don't know. I don't know anymore when it comes to him. You also had a book that Mercedes put out, and a lot of the quotes in there are being taken out. One specifically that I saw is the one with Toto talking about Lewis and the reason why they gave him a 1+1 deal. Basically saying that Lewis is getting old, his reflexes are getting old, and they didn't want to be the ones to tell him when to pack it up. Which, what the hell? That is, you are talking about one of the most successful and probably one of the best F1 drivers in history, and you are talking about him like that.
Okay, I'll go out and say it. I don't like Lewis Hamilton. I'll just say that. But like you say, he is one of the best drivers in history. When you go out and treat him like a child, more or less, that's too harsh.
And I think like if you compare Lewis to Fernando, I think Lewis knows he doesn't want to push it longer than Fernando does. Like Lewis knows his time limit. Like I really do think that after the next two seasons at Ferrari,
So the 2025 and 26 seasons, right?
I yes, so I think by the end of 2026, I think even if he doesn't win his eighth title, I think he will be done.
But yeah, that could be, and hopefully he manages to notice when he is done. If he'll see out his contract to being 2027, that's fine. But if he goes beyond that, then I don't think he'll
Well, I don't
have the prowess. But
excuse me.
who knows?
I also think like Ferrari has two very good drivers in their wings. You have Ollie Behrman, who's going to Haas, who has already shown that he is very competent, and I think with those two seasons under his belt, he will be ready for Ferrari by the
Come
time.
2027.
Yes. So I think, and if you're asking me out of the two drivers, 2025 and 2026, between Lewis and Charles, who Ferrari keep, I think they keep Charles.
Which isn't really a big surprise.
No, I mean they signed Charles until 2029.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's like Lewis knows his time limit, and I think when he made this decision, it's one, he wanted to really drive for Ferrari. It's one of the things he wanted to do. And two, he does want to win his eighth, but he also knows where he's going. He also knows all these things that I think he also knows that there is really only a certain amount of time. And I think he took that into accountability when he made this deal. And again, I think it's looking promising that he has a chance next year. even though I think if you're asking me my ranking of who I think will win next year and who's the main threats next year, we can get into that. But I think Lewis really knows that it's 2026 or bust for him.
If we were to play around with the 2027 scenario, do you think it would be 2027 or bust at another level?
I think it depends on how close he gets. Like if he finishes second, only like 100 points off or something, only like what, not 100. Let's say he's 2 race wins down from winning or something like that.
Okay.
I maybe he pushes 2027, but I think it will depend, one, on how many races we get. Two, apparently the FIA is also gonna be doing a interchangeable system. So like one year we'll race at one track and then next year we'll race at another track. Like they're gonna do changing of that. That apparently is in the works. So I think it will also depend on where we go and how the track conditions are.
And of course, we're going to Madrid from 2027,
Correct.
and then we have these other long contracts: your Melbourne's, Vegas's, Austin's.
Monaco.
That's not a long contract, but
They will never take off Monaco. Like they can't. Due to the fact that you have the Triple Crown weekend, you have Le Mans, you have Monaco, and you have the Indy 500. Like they won't take off Monaco.
But they could, in theory.
They could in theory, but they won't.
No, that's another thing. But the Monaco contract isn't that long. It's until 2029. I'm talking into the 2030s. So you have your Miamis, your Las Vegases, your Melbourne.
Miami will be gone.
It has a contract until 2032.
Yeah, it will be gone by the end of that. Especially if Vegas is better, it will be gone. But
who do you think they will replace Miami with?
So they could either replace it with the South American track that just got reinstated.
So
they could,
Kialami?
Yeah, they could do it with a South Korean track, I think it was.
Oh,
there.
the Korean Grand Prix, okay.
Or they could finally move it to Chicago, which I think will be a better track layout because where they plan to have where the outline was for the layout for Chicago, it would actually work better than Miami.
Bangkok is probably another one.
It's possible. I'm just saying if they want to keep it in like the US, I would move it to Chicago than Miami. I think that wraps up this podcast this week. So I would say if you haven't seen Brazil, either the sprint or the qualifying or the race, please go and watch it. It was a great race.
Yes, it's in the F1 TV archives if you have access to those. But
it's also on YouTube to watch the highlights.
Yep, if you want the full races, you can watch the archive footage that F1 TV has if you have access to those. But otherwise, YouTube is your friend, I guess.
But that will do it for us. Again, we have another 3 weeks before our next race in Vegas for our last triple header.
Which is in Sin City, mind you.
I said Vegas.
Vegas, Sin City, whatever you want to call it.
Time for the word.
Big old gambling capital of the world.
Time for another really bad time race where it's at 1 a.m. for me.
7 a.m. for me, so badly timed races.
Woo!
Isn't a thing of the past, which is a shame.
But last 2 races, we can do it. We shall see what happens. But
absolutely,
that's it from us, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, wherever you're listening to this. And I hope you all have a lovely day.